Welcome to Classical Education, a podcast for those who believe in rediscovering the art of asking questions, engaging in conversation, and attending to the ideas at the heart of well-ordered teaching and learning. I invite you to join me on a journey in pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful as a participant in the great conversation, and listen to the many voices coming from the world of classical education. My guest today is Master Penman, Jake Weidman, and I'm very excited to have him on today. I'm a huge fan. I've been following his work for at least 7 or 8 years. I have shown many of his videos and materials and teacher trainings that I've done at schools. And I think the message that he has to share with us today is very, very important for educators and school leadership in deciding how you're going to apply the art of penmanship in your education of children in your schools. So I'm just overjoyed to welcome to our show today, Jake Weidman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of it.
Yeah. So Jake, what I'd like you to do first is just tell our guests your story and journey and how you became a master penman.
Yeah, because it is a rather unconventional journey, as it is an unconventional career. I never thought I'd make a living as an artist. I never thought that, it would be my full-time thing, but always my, passion in the margin. And so I went to school for psychology, and I thought I would specialize in art therapy. And so I did apply to the art program, but was actually rejected. And that was really a first for me, having really excelled in art all my life, only to get to college and finally be able to apply and kind of keep this side game going of my passion for art, and then to be rejected was rather a heavy blow. But God really saw to my career and to my path, and he sort of dropped into my lap this thing called Master Penman, and it was something that I stumbled upon while I was in school, and I found down this happy little rabbit's hole this small association that was keeping the art of penmanship alive. And so I discovered this YouTube video of John DeColobus, who is still the greatest ornamental penman alive and one of the other master penmen. And when I saw him writing, I was like, that is it. That is exactly what I wanted to do. And so I did a deep dive into the association and the history. And so once I found it, I pursued it heavily, even though I was in school, and still didn't think, it was going to there was going to be any future in it for me other than just as sort of a side passion. But after graduating college and not really finding any work in psychology, but always finding these little jobs in art, these little jobs grew more and more into a career with, kind of my love for penmanship and lettering as that special sauce, that thing that distinguished me from other artists, and started marking my career as I went forward.
Well, I remember when I stumbled on it, it was a little mini, like a mid-course commercial, and it was your
Sure.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that
like
was
8 or 9 years ago, at least, on YouTube. It's been a
Yep.
while.
Yeah. It
And
was right around that time. And that was kind of a tipping point too in my career. That little video certainly made its rounds. It ended up going viral in the first week and getting over 20 million views on
well, I was one of the 20 million, I'm
platform.
sure.
So nice.
Yeah, well, I remember, so around that time, I was hired to work at responsive ed charter schools and help transition 25 K through 5 schools into a classical model from a kind of a more of a regular traditional charter school model into a specifically classical model. And they brought me in to help transition those schools. And I had to come up with a plan of what are we going to do our first year to train these teachers. And I knew
Mm,
copy work was a really important part of classical education,
mm.
and they needed to understand how to apply the art of copy work in the classroom with 20 students. And so what I did was to break the ice of this conversation, I showed your video, that particular video, which I'll link in the show notes. And all the teachers loved it. They were on board, and I created all their copywork passages from the class novels the students would be reading. And I trained the teachers in how to implement the art of copywork in the classroom. Well, come to find out that years later, the teachers are still showing that video in the classroom to their students.
Oh,
My
you're
daughter,
kidding.
no,
Wow.
my daughter actually was a teacher aide at one of the schools for second grade. And they were beginning to learn cursive in second grade at these schools. And my daughter comes home and she goes, Mom, you're not going to believe this. She goes, you know that video of Jake Weidman and handwriting that you love so much? And I was like, yeah, I showed it to the teachers a few years ago when I trained them. She goes, well, the second graders love that video and they ask to watch it every single day.
Ye Are you kidding me? That is crazy. My gosh. That
Yeah, so
is so sweet. Wow.
you
I'm
have
really
had a
honored to hear that,
huge
actually.
impact. I wanted you to know this, that you have had a huge impact in classrooms at schools,
Mm,
not only with teachers, but little children. That little Coors commercial story
wow.
that you did has had a huge impact on a lot of students. And I went
Oh,
in
that's
and
so great to hear.
yeah, and then I went in and taught. There were seventh and eighth graders at one of the schools, and um they were not teaching cursive at all at that time because the Texas state standards had eliminated cursive from the
Mm,
standards. But I
yep.
went in and said, we have to do cursive because it's really helpful, which you and I will talk about in a little later, helpful for dyslexia, and it's really good to learn for any student. They need to learn cursive. And so I said, I'm happy to make a presentation to your middle school students about this. So the teacher said, yeah, I want you
Mm,
to. So I came in and I talked to them about cursive, and I showed them your video. And then I said, now how many of you would like to learn cursive? Just be honest. Don't be shy. If there's only one of you, that's
mm.
okay. Don't raise your hands just because another person is raising their hand. The entire class, their hands shot straight up in the air. And I said, okay, well, your teacher doesn't have time to teach you cursive. So I created this little packet for you to learn all the strokes so you can self teach in cursive at home. And I got an email from the teacher 2 or 3 weeks later. The students were asking for more. They were
Wow. Oh,
doing it
that's
on
so
their
great to hear.
own. Isn't that
Mm.
encouraging? So
Oh, that's so awesome.
I am more than ecstatic to have you on my podcast today because the impact you've had personally with the schools I've worked with. So yeah, I'm very excited to have you. I want
Wow.
my podcast listeners to know who you are and know how important your message is. So I want to dive into a quote from your TED talk that you did years ago about penmanship in the 21st century. So what I'd
Mm,
like to do is in this particular quote, I'm going to read it, and I will put a link to that TED talk in our show notes. You gave you actually talked about the power of the pen, and you made an important statement about educating children in penmanship. And this is what you said.
mm,
And then we're going to unpack it. You said, beyond the fact that we are in a modern age, I do believe that typing is a very fundamental tool that children do need to learn. However, they should not be learning it at the expense of handwriting. Schools are learning more and more on leaning more and more on technology to help move kids down the conveyor belt of the educational system. But what we need to do is be a good steward of both and listen to what technology is telling us and pick up the pen and keep writing. It is not technology that is the direct enemy of the pen. It is our dependency on the technology. And the greater we grow on our dependency of technology, what we may soon find is that we have created the most technologically advanced way of creating illiteracy. Use this, the pen, and you will develop creative literacy. Handwriting is such a personal act, and is it any wonder that you can actually use your own signature interchangeably with your fingerprint? So I
mm.
want to unpack that quote. There are basically three huge ideas I hear in this. One, you distinguish typing as a tool and penmanship as an art. the
Hmm.
proper role of technology in education, and then the idea of literacy with pens, because that's, I don't think a lot of people have made the connection of literacy with a pen. So I want you to sort of take that quote and unpack it for us.
So yeah, the detriment that we see today, I think, is becoming more and more apparent to people, which is why there is such a pushback um, through a lot of like the charter schools and classical schools, and homeschooling that has taken off like crazy, because they see the things that were done where it was in the public school system that was always trying to like to pare down and strip back and make things easier to move kids along that conveyor belt that I spoke about. um, and in so doing, it's like they realize that they've thrown out so much of the development, the actual development of the child, with just the acceleration through the educational program, so called. Because it's like in the end, it's like they're not educating them on much. They're just trying to make them meet requirements and get them through the curriculum year after year, but not paying attention to their critical development. And that's what I was saying is like, we have all this unbelievable research, and this is what I was touching on in that statement, is like, in school, in cognitive psychology, we learned about the development of the brain and how critically important it was that all of those interconnectivities of using your hand to formulate the letters gives you a deeper understanding of the anatomy of each individual letter, so that you're able to recognize it when you see it on the page. So it lends really well to writing, but it also lends deeply to reading, being able to write correctly. And reading and writing, those are the two pillars of what it means to be literate. And so sadly, it's like they've done away with that. Texas is among the 41 states that stopped requiring cursive handwriting as a part of their curriculum. And in some states, I believe it was Indiana, required no handwriting education whatsoever. It was essentially a take home packet with your parents. And so and I think this is sad on a couple of levels. First, I think it's the biggest detriment is to the overall education of children, which we've seen drop precipitously over the past several years. Um, but there's also, you're weeding out the actual creative part of learning.
Mhm.
We usually tack on, the arts as sort of this et cetera to education, which is why, arts and music programs are the first to go when a school program has to cut its budget. But they're doing so even in the smaller areas, and handwriting is one of them. Handwriting is an opportunity to actually call on your creativity when you are learning, and be able to be expressive and communicative at the same time. And so it's like when you do away with that, you're not only taking away the fundamental parts of what it means to be educated, but you're actually stripping out the beauty and the creativity as well, which draws you more and more into the educational process.
Right. Oh, that is really good. Um, I think that the idea of penmanship tying to literacy was a really important statement that you made, especially how the tactile movements of the pen helping the students actually learn how to read.
Mm.
Can you speak a little more into that at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's actually a lot that, especially when you're speaking of cursive handwriting in particular, creates an even stronger connection in the brain by literally linking one letter to the next. This helps out in a lot of ways. It helps. Handwriting shows very early on in kids who struggle with dyslexia, who struggle with dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is where you're flipping the letter.
Mhm.
in a different direction. And so it's like, if you're not writing that down, if you're just typing that on the keyboard, then it's like that's never going to actually show up. You're never going to realize that there is, you know, that aspect of the child needs some further education to kind of hone in on that micro level of education to help them get a greater understanding of the letter, its functionality, anatomy, and appearance, so that they're able to read it. So what cursive handwriting does is it actually creates a connection inside of the brain. As you're creating a connection literally on the paper, there's connections in the brain that are going on to help you orient the letter correctly. So you're fighting, you're fighting that dysgraphia, and then that stronger connection, one letter to the next, really cements it in your brain and creates a tighter identity of the word as this, as this beautiful chain of letters now linked together, and that has more of a solid representation of the word in your mind, so that you're able to recognize it. And that's really beautiful. Not to mention that, the ergonomics that go into writing. There's a beautiful rhythm to writing cursive. And I also talked about this in a little bit in that TED talk. But Platt Roger Spencer, when he first created Spencerian penmanship, it should be written at a 52-degree angle. Well, that is most pleasing to the eye, and it is most natural. It is the most natural leaning angle of the letters when using wrist movement. So that larger joint, rather than relying on all of the finger movements to form the letter. So in the end, it's writing. It becomes more fluid, more natural. It's a natural expression of your body, and you don't fatigue nearly as quickly as you do just like always depending on finger movement.
Mhm.
So there's so much there, and then it's like, and we just forgot. It's like we forgot all that our forefathers had poured into this, had developed and instilled in this form of handwriting. And we follow sort of this. It's one of my favorite terms from C.S. Lewis. He calls it chronological snobbery, where you just by default you believe that because you are of a later generation, that you are of a more modern age, then you automatically know more than every previous generation that went before you. But that is not at all the case, and that is not at all what education itself stands on. It stands on like learning from the past and building always on the discoveries of people in the past, and that is the greatest expression of human flourishing. So to do that, to all of this sudden like throw out what all of our forefathers had poured into this, had really innovated in this really dynamic and amazing way, is to really cut off the branch that we are standing on.
Oh, that's great. Yes. I want to talk more about the Spencerian writing curriculum because I'd like to. Uh, I love that curriculum personally, and I should tell a short little personal story. Hopefully, my husband's okay with this. He went through a little brief hiccup that was very strange in his early 40s where he started smoking. He was not a smoker, and he started smoking. He smoked for about 2 years, and I hated it. And do you know how he stopped smoking? He decided to take the Spencerian cursive workbooks I had in the house and teach himself handwriting with his non-dominant hand as an effort to help him quit smoking. So
Really?
every time he
Wow.
would want a cigarette, he would work on his Spencerian handwriting with his non-dominant hand, and it helped him to quit smoking. It's a crazy story. I
That
can't.
is
I'm
so
a huge fan of
fascinating.
yours.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Well, there you go. Spencer could put Nicorette out of business right
that's
there. Everybody
right.
followed that. How
So
fascinating. That's
isn't
great.
that isn't that interesting? I thought it was very funny that he chose that, and his handwriting got beautiful with his left hand. He's not a lefty.
Hmm.
So Spencerian handwriting is, if I understand right, it is the curriculum that was used in schools traditionally, like up until June. Do you know the history of that, or when they stopped using it and why they stopped using it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it evolved. Well, let me go back. So with the great like westward expansion, and you had all of these like small schoolhouses popping up. It became a real challenge, um, and this was across the board. There was a real challenge as far as like creating a real standard for education.
Hmm.
That was especially true of handwriting, because up to that point, what we were just essentially borrowing English roundhand, and which is what the Declaration of Independence was written in. And it's a very beautiful form, but it takes a lot of it requires a lot of ink because it is a shaded script. There's a lot of like heavy downstrokes. So you're laying a lot of ink on the paper. You're also fatiguing the quill, which they were writing with a lot, by putting a lot more pressure on the quill. And so more quill cuts would be required to sharpen the quill. So it was very slow, it was very laborious, and especially to teach to children, it was very difficult. And then to keep that uniform across the whole country that's spreading westward, and you have these little school systems popping up, there was definitely need for America's own style of penmanship. And so along came Platt Rogers Spencer. And Platt Rogers Spencer was, he was only a young boy. He was just obsessed with handwriting, but he was so poor that he couldn't even afford paper to write on. So a lot of his initial forms were actually worked out just writing in the sand on the shores of Lake Geneva. But he had this beautiful philosophy to his handwriting. He believed that God, who is the creator of all beauty and of all nature, had instilled that beauty in nature. And so if Platt Rogers Spencer took inspiration for his handwriting from the things that he saw around him, then he would have the beauty of God in his own hand. And so the lean of the letters was inspired by like the wheat blowing in the field. He found ovals in everything. He saw ovals in the round rocks on the lake shores of Lake Geneva as he was like working out his letter forms in the sand, or even the movement of like the joints of animals, like a bounding stag or a jumping bunny, was sort of, he saw in that this sort of elliptical shape. And so he poured that into his letter forms, and that sort of created this beautiful aesthetic backbone to his writing. And then from there, he also he figured out muscular movement, so movement from the wrist, and that was critically important to the execution. And then it was also an unshaded script, so it required less trips to the inkwell because you weren't laying down as much ink, and it was more fine hairlines. And at that point that he devised his handwriting, we were transitioning from the quill to the steel pen point, which was a huge invention at its time and radically changed penmanship moving forward. So that was a great tool that came right at the right time. So that was the standard for handwriting for Americans for years, and taught throughout schoolhouses across the country.
That's fascinating. Can you tell me about what year that was and when that started?
Yeah, it was right around the end of the Civil War. So it was like the late 1860s is when he first started
Hmm.
devising this style of handwriting. And then
Hmm.
from there, it was actually, it was picked up years later as there were further advances in like writing technology. Excuse me. As there were advances in writing technology, there was another master penman who came along, and his name was A. Palmer, and he created the Palmer method for handwriting. And he got his start because he was working as a log keeper for the railroad. And so he was writing all day long, and it was his responsibility to record every single train that came into the yard and catalog everything that was on each train car. So he was writing by hand all day long. And so he took Spencer's form and he sort of abbreviated it. He took away some of the flourishes. He created some of the ligatures to link a little bit quicker, to switch back on themselves in a way that was a little bit more fluid and truncated. And from that, he created what is essentially, I mean, it's more well known today even than Spencerian script in the school realm, because it had a longer run essentially. I mean, I think it only stopped being a fundamental part of the school system is in like the late 70s or even early 80s. So it was a very popular form of penmanship that that we know today as traditional American cursive.
Oh, that's interesting. So if schools are looking for, do you have like opinions on curriculum for teaching children? I'm sure you have small children. Like what you're what would you be looking for as a parent in a school, sending your kids to school in curriculum for penmanship?
That's a really good question. You know, my mentor Michael Soll has some phenomenal books out there for American cursive handwriting, both young and old. So, and in fact, I just wrote a foreword to his latest book on it. That's a great. He's got some really great resources out there that are obviously going to be rooted in in all of this rich history.
So does he have curriculum for children that would be appropriate in schools?
Yeah, yeah, he does. Some of them are younger. I'm not sure. I'm not as familiar. I think he came out with one recently that was for younger ages, but I know he's hugely popular in like the homeschool network for his curriculum. So I'm just not sure if he's ever cracked the nut into like a formal educational like system beyond homeschooling, but he's a real go-to in that
Oh,
sense. Because I see, you know, I see a lot of um, cursive handwriting curriculum. In fact, I've been asked to endorse them, but you know, like when I look at them, I take a close look and I'm like, I can't put my name behind it because
sure.
it's like there's certain things like letters not following the same slant angle is pretty critical. That's what creates, you know, its cohesion. That means that it's executed using the same muscles in this in a similar movement. And so it's like those are the things that I look for when I look at kids curriculum, because it's like if their letter forms are off of a consistent slant angle, or they don't share the same base root in some of their fundamental strokes, then, you know, for me, they don't pass muster. But I have a rather high bar.
So Michael Saul, how do you spell his last name?
Sull.
Okay, so we'll look him up online and get his materials on the in the show notes. Do you have children that you're teaching at home? Your own children?
I do. Well, yes, I have. Right now, we're doing like a hybrid homeschool program between, and this is like the school that we're at is like a classical
Yes.
Christian school, and so they have like their traditional program, but they also have a homeschool hybrid. And so that's actually what we're doing with our daughter right now. And she's loving it. She's excelling at it. And handwriting happens to be one of her favorite things that she's doing right now. She's
Oh,
learning cursive and she's technically in kindergarten. So a lot earlier than I did growing up. I had to wait till the third grade. So
sure.
which I was chomping at the bit to do. So it's a real joy to see her as young as she is, just absolutely excelling at it.
So I'm curious, is um are her cursive lessons in kindergarten tied to her learning of the phonograms and reading?
You know, I believe that they are. She is learning that at the same time.
Hmm.
So my wife is actually more in charge. Of course I poke my head in whenever it comes time to like to talk about cursive handwriting, but but my wife knows my methods rather well, so she's doing a good job and making sure that that Emma is learning beautifully. But yeah, she's learning like her phonetics, and
Yes.
it's really fun to hear her like recite through that, and even see her like she just started reading, and that was with Hannah, and Hannah's like super excited about that. She says it's so thrilling
Yes.
to be able to teach your own child to read. It's such a rich reward.
It really is. It's true. I've done the same thing. Um, I think the school ought to hire you to come in and do professional development for handwriting and doing copy work and
Yeah.
pen.
Well, we've talked about that. There's probably down the line there's like a we're in discussions about having sort of an after school kind of
Mhm.
handwriting calligraphy intensive at some point.
Yeah, I think there's a huge need, and I could get you connected with a lot of schools that could use you if you want to start doing some professional development for schools. It's important. It's very needed, um, and I'm very concerned about the well the well-being of the mind in schools today being very tied to handwriting. I think it's one of the arts that has been, as you know, just not valued as important. And I really appreciate that you're tying it directly to literacy because I could not agree more. I think that good phonics programs are going to tie cursive penmanship into learning how to read. And there's kind of a misunderstanding that by learning to write in cursive, it's going to hinder their ability to learn how to read print. Have you heard this, or do you have any thoughts on that?
No, there is nothing in the data that shows that. Absolutely not. I think the prevalence of like um, the prevalence of like regular type is so part of our culture. Um, it is much more likely the case that the kids do not learn how to read cursive, um, who do not learn how to write cursive are not going to be able to read cursive. That has proven out time and time again. And even, it's like you look at it's not just receiving a beautiful letter from grandma or something and not being able to understand what it says. As sad as that is, it's our founding documents for this country were written in cursive, and it's like you're not going to be able to read like documents from history if you don't understand cursive. And not to mention that it's like even around us, like how many beautiful logos are done in a connected script, and it's such a beautiful form of writing that really rounds out the broad expression um, of human creativity and their integration of thought in the word and expression, because there is every individual form of writing carries underlying sort of its own expression and even elements of its own of the culture from which it was born and the time from which it was born. So you're missing out on a lot more by not learning cursive and just thinking like we can go to something that is um you know how boring of a world would it be if it was all just Arial or Helvetica. That's a rather dark and dismal world to imagine, especially for me.
It's true, and I love fonts. I very particular about fonts. My classical education podcast, the word classical education is in cursive, and I hired a professional artist to draw the whole piece of art, which is on my website. But it's a beautiful, gorgeous mural that she hand drew with pastels. I paid a lot of money, and then we just pulled a part of it out for the
Hmm.
actual podcast logo. But I was like, if you're going to talk about classical education and how classical education is the art of teaching and learning, then I couldn't just have a little vector that was done on a computer. I needed
Right.
something that was hand drawn, and I needed the word classical education to be in cursive. And in fact, it's interesting. The whole banner I have of the logo that the logo came from. Now that you say it, it has lots of ovals and movement because I'm thinking there's
Mm.
water and the waves in the water have that
Oh, how
oval
pretty. Nice.
mentioning that Spencer saw in nature. I was even thinking the ripples of water have that cursive look to them, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's so great. I'll have to go
Yeah,
back to the website and take a look at that.
yeah, it's on the podcast tab of the website down the bottom, and the whole painting I had. Well, it's not a painting. She did pastels, but she
Mm.
hand drew the whole thing, and it was pretty large, actually. I have a picture of her drawing it. She's a beautiful artist.
Oh, so
Um,
cool.
so, and I know there's a lot of research that people could dig up and find. Do you have any on the top of your head of research that supports like typing versus cursive versus print? Is there anything you could point to directly? I mean, we can put some links in the show notes if you can't think of any at the moment. I know that you've mentioned some in
Yeah.
your talk.
I mean, a lot of them um, were actually, years ago and kind of in the, it was when I was getting my degree in psychology. And of course, this was an element that I was fascinated by. And we did talk at length on about it, especially in cognitive psychology, which is one of my favorite classes. And so a lot of it was actually in the kind of in the like the research bank of the university. But there was tons of research showing the implications of that writing has on the brain, and what not writing does to education. So it's just kind of sad. It's like it's a rather, it's kind of crazy, the hubris of a society that on the one hand will discover something, it's it's not even arguable, but then reject it entirely. I mean, I don't quite understand how they square that circle, but
Right.
um, we are, and that
Yeah,
happens in a lot of different ways right now in our society. So
it's true. Well, I hope that some schools that headmasters that are listening would consider that even like calligraphy and some of the more what do you say, like what you're doing, the master penman type of the art of penmanship classes could be offered at schools, especially for junior high and high school as electives. I think would be really important. But I think that really getting good penmanship in the elementary schools is crucial. um, Oh, I guess I wanted you to talk a little bit about your work with making pens, because I've kind of followed your work and I think it's beautiful, and maybe talk a little bit about the importance of having a good writing tool and how that makes a difference.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was a part of my journey. Like when I first started, I was disappointed with what was available at my local art store. It was these sort of sad, plastic pen holders. And a pen holder is different for those people not in the calligraphy world. The pen holder holds the pen nib, which is typically, called the pen. So when I say a pen holder, it's like the shaft which holds the pen. And so I started making my own to hold my nibs for me as I wrote, um became it started off as like a beautiful, fun expression, integrating my woodwork um into my calligraphy. But then um I really discovered the importance of ergonomics and balance to the pen is really important for having control, especially for doing those really minute movements, things like pen manipulation, which is which way the tines splay as you're writing across the page in order to create the variation of the line. But furthermore, it was like keeping your hand in that proper writing position. And so I started creating these very like ergonomic forms that by their shape they sort of help you hold the pen in the right position. And this was really like groundbreaking for me. And so now it's typically the only I haven't been able to make pens for a while. I'm actually working with an individual now about who is going to be producing my pens because I'm so inundated right now with just commission work. But the only pens I sell now are ergonomic. So there's either the signature ergonomic or the hummingbird ergonomic. There's sort of this beautiful shape that emerged of this like abstracted hummingbird um, in one of my ergonomic like experiments, and it just fits so beautifully and naturally in the hand, and is obviously it's much smaller, very lightweight. So you can gracefully move across the page, and so that's been a really uh, that's been a really critical part of my career, and even my success. I think is being able to recognize the proper tools and being able to make them when I need them.
Right. So are you selling them on your website? Is there a link we can provide in the show notes?
They are forthcoming. So yeah, I mean, and I'm not sure, we might create, I'm sure Hannah could put together a sort of a list for those people who are
Okay.
like interested in those pens, because we will have those up and running very shortly.
Okay, yeah, let's go get those in the show notes. Even if I launch the show before we have the links, we'll at least get them. I can always edit it and put them in there later. What about pens and pencils for children? Is there a recommendation for what to look for and what not to look for children?
Oh man, that is a really good question. I would say like uh pencil practice is very good for kids. There's a lot of forgiveness to pencil practice, and there's a lot that you can actually do. You can actually get some line variation and stuff as the children get a little bit more advanced. If they want to do something that's more akin to Spencerian script and is a little bit more expressive, there's things that like I even start a lot of my students off in my calligraphy classes by picking up the pencil again. So so just a really good you know semi-soft HB or number two pencil um is is a really, I mean, I love black wing pencils are just, they're so nice, they're so beautifully made. um they give you a good healthy eraser on the end of it. um and it's made of like aromatic cedar and high quality graphite. So so those are beautiful pencils to use. um but and then I recommend, and I'm still trying to figure out what the magic point will be because we haven't quite transitioned my daughter to pens yet. But I'm a huge advocate for fountain pens. So if your kids are a little bit older, getting them into fountain pens would be a really good idea, because using ballpoint pens requires so much pressure and friction that it sort of trains you to have a heavy hand as you write, which is going to fatigue you. It's going to change the shape of your letter form and make the whole experience a lot more laborious. So writing with a fountain pen where the ink is more fluid, you don't put any pressure down. That is a much more natural way of writing. And then in the penman, in like the fountain pen world, say you never get into calligraphy, there's unbelievable fountain pens out there that are just phenomenal. And you can really you can really go to all ends. One of my best friends is Brian Goulet, and he owns the largest online fountain pen retailer. He is the largest fountain pen online retailer, and he has some amazing resources. And he's done thousands of videos on using fountain pens and upkeep of fountain pens. So that's a really great resource, gouletpens.com.
If you
Uh,
could send me after our interview, send me a link to maybe a few that you would recommend for like junior high and high school students.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
because
this,
they
yeah.
make they make disposable fountain
Okay.
pens that are really cheap. You can buy them on Amazon even. and they're made by Pilot. It's called the Pilot Varsity, and it's going to be just as expensive as your pretty much your everyday like ballpoint or rollerball pen, and they're beautiful to use. They're really really great. So great entry point, and you can dispose them afterwards after you're all finished up with them.
Okay, this is really helpful. This is what schools need to know.
Oh, great,
Yeah,
great.
and any other tips you can think of for teachers in terms of, let's say we've got a second grade teacher who has a student who's just complaining that their hand hurts so much. What tips would you give to that teacher?
Mm, yeah. So then it is about going back to some of those forms, which I know Michael Soul's curriculum will talk about. He uses a lot of combination movement. So whereas like transitioning from finger movement to whole arm and wrist movement might be very difficult for a lot of people in our modern age who are just so set in finger movement. He's got a great resources out there on combination movement. So it's all of those things working together. So while a child may use pretty much by default, all today is going to be using in the majority finger movement, which is going to cause your hand to cramp most. There are some like exercises and disciplines in the, that are expressed in the book that talk about using more like wrist movement. So that would be really helpful for students like that.
Okay, this is great. This is amazing. I've learned so much today. Okay, I'm going to close our interview and ask our closing question. My closing question that all of our guests get to choose from. You can either tell us a quote that has had a huge impact on your life, or a book that you wish you had read sooner in your life.
Mm. Uh, a book that I wish that I had read sooner in my life was it's a tiny, tiny little book of lectures by John Ruskin. And he was like the leading like art critic of the Victorian period.
Sesame
And
and Lilies, right? Is it Sesame
uh
and
no, it's a Joy Forever, The Two
Oh,
Paths.
okay. Okay.
Is the one that I'm thinking of. And so he talks about the economy of art and of time and of artists. Uh and that one I wish I would have discovered sooner, because he had some really profound things to say about artists and that have spoken like so they've almost been prophetic in my life in a way, just because they've spoken so accurately. He has one beautiful quote in there about where do you find your artists, where do you find your men of genius? They are like they're like gold. You cannot make one grain of them. You must find them nugget fashioned in a river stream. You can take them home, you can refine them, you can um, turn them into something useful, but you cannot make one bit of them yourself. So that was really amazing, because at those times in my life where um, I would say I was very much nugget fashioned in a river stream, feeling lost somewhere. It's like that would have given me just immense
Mhm.
hope.
What was the
So,
name of it again? A Joy.
A Joy Forever, The Two Paths by John Ruskin.
I don't know.
Uh,
I haven't heard of this one. And I'm surprised because I'm a John Ruskin fan. And in fact, when you go to my podcast tab on my website, which is beautifulteaching.com, go to my podcast
yeah.
and you scroll down, you'll see the banner I had commissioned. And under that is a John Ruskin quote.
Oh, is that right?
I
Oh,
did.
that is so awesome.
You're my
That's
first
great.
guest to actually bring up John Ruskin as a end of the podcast interview. So I'm excited. I like you even more. I already liked you before, but yeah, no.
Oh, nice. Good. Yeah, he's a hero, uh and his work has been such a deep encouragement to my own.
Thank you. Well, this was amazing, and I will get. I guess I'll email your wife all of this links we need that we've talked about, so we can get them in the show notes.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
We'll definitely do that. Whatever you need, we'll get it to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be a part of the conversation in the podcast.
Thank you for listening. You can get involved in a few ways. There's a Facebook page where we actively discuss the ideas around classical education. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/classical education. And if you want to help offset our production costs, you can support the podcast financially by going to www.classicaleducationpodcast.com/support. As the great artist and educator John Ruskin once said, "Well, my friends, the final result of the education I want you to give your children will be in a few words this: they will know what it is to see the sky, they will know what it is to breathe it, and they will know best of all what it is to behave under it as in the presence of a Father who is in heaven."